Shelli realised very early that her mother did not love her. Actually, there were plenty of signs that her mother despised her. However, the child's hopes were finally shattered during one of the dinners when she was only 8 years old. That evening, Shelli came home from walking with her friends. It was a sweltering summer. The sun, yellow as brass, lavished its rays on the city. Shelli's mood was delightful. After all, she had just finished second grade, and 3 months of vacation lay ahead. Her dark blonde braid, which she had braided herself that morning, was completely disheveled. A light tan was already visible on her face and arms. Her knees were scraped from an unfortunate fall while jumping rope. But it wasn't a problem. Shelli had immediately provided herself with emergency medical care by applying plantain leaves to the abrasions. With a slight shortage of breath from running up the stairs to the 5th floor, she burst into the house, and the smile on her flushed face vanished as soon as she saw her mother. The woman stood in the hallway, arms crossed, looking at her daughter with reproach and irritation. "Where have you been all day?" her mother shouted immediately. "Why didn't you come to lunch? Did you see the time?" "Yes, I was playing in Maggie's yard, and then we went to her place for lunch. I told you she invited me. You said it was okay," the girl whispered. "We played ball and hopscotch, jumped rope." But her mum only snorted. Of course, she didn't remember that her daughter had told her where she would be. The careless woman usually let her daughter's words pass, nodding or waving her off, saying, "Do what you want, just leave me alone." "Dinner's on the table. I'm not going to warm it for you. You should have come on time," Lindsay said. The girl just shrugged. She had long ago learned to be independent and didn't feel guilty. When was this mythical on time her mum talked about? The girl didn't know. After washing her dirty palms from colourful chalk and dust, she hurried to the kitchen. Shelli had worked up a wolf's appetite in the fresh air. On the table in a white pot were pasta and some cold sausages. The girl took a plate and generously helped herself. Deciding to make her dish delicious, Shelli took out ketchup from the refrigerator. While pouring ketchup, she accidentally pressed it too hard. Almost half of the bottle poured onto the plate with an unpleasant sound. "Ouch!" Shelli gasped, immediately squeezing her head into her shoulders, sensing what was to follow. Her mother looked at her with the eyes of a hawk, exclaimed angrily, "What are you doing? Are you completely armless or what? You can't even pour ketchup properly." "It was an accident," Shelli excused herself, blushing from fright and nerves. "I just pressed." "Just pressed? Everything is just with you. I earned money for this ketchup, you know, and it's not easy, let me tell you. So, you'll eat every last drop and lick the plate. Do you understand?" Shelli blinked, dumbfounded, looking at the puddle of ketchup covering the sausages, while her mother did not stop accusing her of wastefulness, ingratitude, and not knowing the value of money. The girl didn't dare to object. At first, the task seemed manageable because she loved ketchup, but after a couple of spoonfuls, she felt sick. "Mum, may I not finish?" she asked pitifully. Tears filled her eyes as she remembered the recent family dinner at Maggie's. Her mother had been joking merrily while taking a homemade pizza from the oven, calling her smart and even offering an extra scoop of ice cream for dessert. Why couldn't she have the same gentle mother? "I said eat it all. Don't cry, it's your own fault," her mother said flatly. "Maybe this way you'll learn something." Shelli finished her meal. She felt sick and hurt. During the night, the girl had a stomachache. However, as her mother had hoped, she learned a few things. First, since then she has not eaten ketchup at all. Secondly, the girl finally realized that her mother would not love her, no matter how hard she tried. And Shelli tried, Honestly, she tried. Even as a child, she brought crafts and drawings from kindergarten, hoping her mother would pat her on the head and hang them on the refrigerator, like her friends' mothers did. However, her mum would only hum or nod, and then the girl would find the crafts in the trash. Shelli never heard affectionate words from her mother, never enjoyed tender and warm hugs, and received neither support nor attention. Only reproaches came from her mother, as if she didn't notice her daughter's merits and only picked up on the slightest shortcomings. At first, Shelli was sure it was her fault. Lindsay often scolded her daughter for the smallest mistakes and called her names. Shelli believed her mother was right. Of course, her mother didn't love her because the girl herself was guilty. Who would love such a fool? So, Shelli began to react sensitively to her mother's nagging. It seemed to her that if she corrected something in herself, her mother would praise and love her. When Lindsay said that the girl was inept and couldn't put on shoes or dress without help, Shelli decided to correct it. As a result, she became the most nimble in the kindergarten. She put on her own tights for walks, distinguishing between front and back. She buttoned her jacket up to her chin. All the tutors admired Shelli's independence, but her mother didn't appreciate it. Shelli cleaned up her toys herself, afraid of causing her mother's anger if she noticed a doll on the floor. One day the girl decided to help her mother with cleaning. She took a rag, wet it, and wiped the table, closet, and even the mirror, wherever she could reach. She anticipated her mother calling her a clever girl and her helper. And yes, Lindsay noticed her daughter's efforts, but she clenched her hands into fists, turned purple and yelled, "Are you completely insane? What kind of rag do you use to clean, you fool? A floor rag! There are stains everywhere!" Shelli was severely punished for her impulse. In the first grade, if the girl couldn't memorize something, her mother called her stupid. Shelli tried to prove otherwise. She wrote the letters cautiously, sitting for long periods instead of playing with her toys. She learned to write very neatly and beautifully, with the right slant. But it was all in vain. Nothing could please Lindsay. For a long time, Shelli didn't give up her struggle. She, like any child who loves her mother despite everything, found it extremely difficult to admit that her mother hated her. Shelli thought that all mothers loved their children, and it was an axiom. So, if her mother was angry, there must be something wrong with her, with Shelli. Shelli learned the true reason for this attitude by chance, when she was already in the high school. That day, she returned from school early, having missed physical education. The girl didn't like to skip school, but a week before, her classmates had taken away her sports uniform, saying it smelled bad, and threw it away. Shelli couldn't buy a new set of clothes, and was afraid to tell her mother. So until the issue with the uniform was resolved, she ran away from classes. From the threshold, Shelli felt a persistent, irritating odour of cigarette smoke in the house. There were someone else's shoes, and from the kitchen came drunken female laughter. Shelli rolled her eyes, knowing perfectly well who their guest was, her mother's new friend, Diane, who often came to visit for a glass of tea. But what were they both doing at home on a Tuesday afternoon? Shouldn't her mum have a shift today? Lindsay worked as a cashier in a store. Diane was a nurse at the regional hospital. But now they were both in the kitchen. The girl hesitated on the threshold of her own house, glancing at the front door. Should she go for a walk somewhere? Though the friends' party might end well past midnight, and if she came later, it would only be worse. Her mum would start throwing tantrums or lecturing her. Already, frank conversations were coming from the kitchen. "Do you realise what Ben has done?" Diane shared details of her personal life. "He started groping me, right during the operation. A man under anaesthesia on the table, and his hand on my hip. Good thing no one noticed, because there was already rumours about us. They'll get to his wife." He's still not divorced? Lindsay asked, pouring her friend another shot. No, he keeps feeding me with tomorrow. He says he can't do that to his children. He doesn't care about his wife, of course. They haven't slept together for a long time, but he loves his son and daughter. Sighing, the schoolgirl picked up her backpack and walked down the corridor. She finally decided to say hello, signalling her presence, and then hide in her room. But when she heard her mother's words, the girl froze, listening to the conversation. These children, she said, irritably smacking her lips. They break everyone's fate. What? Their own mothers. Despite being used to the role of scapegoat, the girl's chest ached unpleasantly. She gripped the strap of her backpack tighter, pulling it up onto her shoulder, and seemed to stop breathing. You know, here I am, already 37. I would like at least some child, Diane pouted. The clock is ticking. Take mine, giggled Lindsay. I'll pay you extra. The women laughed, and then there was a clinking of old crystal glasses. Shelli swallowed a lump. She was the only one who didn't find her mother's joke funny. Having drunk and snacked, Diane asked, And what about Shelli? Saw her recently in the grocery store. She's become such a beauty. Yes, beautiful, but not taking after me, the mother muttered unhappily. The girl is all her father, just a copy. Those blue eyes, high forehead, nose, even the same expression. Can you imagine? Lindsay's voice clearly showed displeasure with her daughter's appearance. For Shelli, her mother's words were also not a surprise, but it was the first time they were said out loud. The girl had guessed before that she reminded her mother of her hated father. Now she felt so suffocated and pained that her throat was constricted by tears. It was as if someone invisible had wrapped their hands around it, pulling it down, trying to strangle her. Was it her fault that she had been born? Was it her fault that her father's genes had been stronger, giving her piercing blue eyes like a clear summer sky, and not brown like her mother's? When I look at Shelli, I see only her father in front of me, the woman continued, lighting another cigarette. I get so angry my chest burns. He's probably still somewhere in Europe, enjoying a rich life. A fucking businessman. And I'm left with a broken trough and raising our daughter alone. Diane sighed heavily, but did not comment on this news. It must have been the first time she heard such complaints from her friend. But Shelli was surprised. After all, her mother always told her that her father was dead. I still have a picture of him. Do you want to see it? Lindsay suddenly offered. Go ahead, approved Diane. The girl, afraid of being caught eavesdropping, wanted to run away, but her mother was not going to leave the kitchen. She put a chair up to the cupboard, climbed on it, and pulled out books with recipes from the top shelves. Shelli had no idea that her mum kept something there. Look at this. My Shelli's father, in person. Handsome, hummed her friend approvingly. From handsome men, you can get only problems. Lindsay lit up a cigarette and pulled a plate, which served as an ashtray closer. I sometimes think how my life would have turned out if I had not gotten pregnant then, she dreamily said. I didn't even finish college. I studied economics and accounting, and then I dropped out because I got pregnant. My parents disowned me. I married Blake when I was 4 months pregnant. Oh, how I loved him. But our life didn't work out. After giving birth, I gained several sizes. I was swollen and puffy. Endocrine metabolic disorder. They prescribed the standard treatment, diet, sports, lack of stress, but Shelli was constantly crying. I didn't sleep at night. I was stressed and I was nervous. I started to take it out on Blake. He didn't earn much. He turned his nose up at me. He said he married a beautiful wife and felt cheated. Naturally, soon he left me, found someone younger, and all because of Shelli. Oh, these men, they're like ungrateful dogs, Diane said. And did Blake pay alimony? No. Shelli is not his daughter. Lindsay said. I tried to sue for money, but he did a DNA test, proving that Shelli is not his daughter. Didn't I tell you? Diane shook her head, but Shelli was completely turned around. When I was in my first year of college, my parents looked for a fiancé. Of course, I was sceptical, but Jordan turned out to be handsome. He looked like a young Brendan Fraser, the one in The Mummy. So we started dating. He was gallant, studied abroad. We corresponded and met on vacation. His family was wealthy and good. All my girlfriends envied me. When I was in my third year, Jordan graduated from his university. He returned here, and our families were already discussing marriage. But that same year I met Blake. He played in a rock band, rode a bike, and wore a leather jacket. Blake turned my head. Despite being brought up strictly after the first date, I found myself in his bed. He was just what I'd always wanted, free, independent. With him, I got my first and only tattoo. From the sounds of it, Lindsay showed her friend a tattoo on her forearm that Shelli had seen before. The time-faded inscription read, "Always on my mind, forever in my heart." Meanwhile, Lindsay continued, "And then I found I was expecting a child, but it wasn't clear who it was with. Of course, I told my mum about my situation, and she ran to Jordan's mum. Like a gentleman, he proposed to me, deciding the baby was his." Lindsay chuckled and continued, "Jordan found out about our relationship with Blake in an ugly way. He caught us in the garage when my dress was pulled up to my waist. Then they clashed, and I thought they would kill each other. Of course, that was followed by a scandal and a breakup." There were sounds of a lighter opening and closing. The woman played nervously with it, remembering her past. "My parents were terrified. They had already made a guest list, rented a venue, and planned grandchildren. And Jordan's family blamed me for everything, calling me the worst names. Despite that, Jordan came to our house once again. He was all gloomy and serious. He said he had thought it over and was ready to forgive me for the sake of the child. He said that we would get married and move away together because he couldn't leave his child. And I said that I loved Blake and that I would have an abortion. That was the end of it. My parents couldn't accept it and gave me an ultimatum. Either apologise to Jordan and try to win him back, or leave the family disgraced. I chose Blake, and before I ran away with him, I said to my mother that I didn't need them, only Blake." The woman sighed heavily. "Blake and I moved to another city to his grandmother's apartment. We began to live together and got married. And then, as I said, he found someone else. By then, my parents didn't want to know me, and I was ashamed to show my face to them. I thought the child would bring me and Blake closer together. That's why I kept it." Shelli couldn't believe her ears. Not only had her mother deceived her, but she also blamed her for her own mistakes. The school backpack fell to the floor of the corridor with a thud. The girl walked resolutely into the kitchen, staring angrily at her mother. What did she expect? That her mother would be ashamed? That she would apologise for years of lying? Alas, Lindsay didn't even raise an eyebrow when she noticed her. "Oh, my daughter is here," she greeted her with a drunken smile. "We were just remembering you. Come and say hello to Diane." The girl muttered a greeting, but still looked only at her mother. Lindsay stood up and walked shakily to her daughter, looking at her carefully, taking in every feature of her face. Look, a copy of her father. She exhaled smoke into Shelley's face. Even a dimple on the chin, like him. The girl recoiled, coughing. Lindsay's cigarettes were cheap and strong. Even when Shelli just stood next to her smoking mother, her throat began to sore. She remembered that at school they once drew posters about the harming of smoking and alcohol. Shelli, who was in 7th grade at the time, had to talk about the dangers of second-hand smoke. She was the best at drawing, so her anti-smoking poster turned out perfectly. She drew a pregnant woman lovingly stroking her belly, and next to her was a man with a cigarette, the smoke of which stretched directly to the unborn baby like a noose. The girl took second place in school, and her class teacher praised her very much. When the girl brought her work home and proudly showed it to her mother, she glanced at the red and black letters and puffed harder, then burned a hole in the paper board, right in the belly of the poster's heroine. "Mum, I heard the whole thing. So, who's my father?" Shelli asked her directly. "What does it matter?" Lindsay raised her eyebrows, giggling mockingly. "Forget it, you fool. If he had needed you so much, he would have found you, wouldn't he? Alas, he certainly doesn't need someone like you. Nobody needs you but me, Shelli." Shelli pressed her lips together in a stubborn gesture that made her mother recoil, narrowing her eyes in indignation. "How annoying you are! You look just like him!" the drunken woman screamed, and her fingers twitched as if she were about to raise her hand and slap her daughter, just to wipe the expression she didn't want from her child's face. Lindsay only held back because there was an audience. Diane was avidly watching someone else's life and the development of events. Shelli blinked angry tears from her eyes. "Maybe if Daddy knew he had a child, he would need me. After all, he left you, not me. And he was right," the girl declared before leaving the kitchen. Her mother squealed at her, even rushed after her, but her friend stopped her. Shelli locked herself in her room, throwing her face into the pillow. Silent tears choked her. "No one wants you," echoed in the schoolgirl's mind. After all, her mother was right. Shelli didn't even have any friends. Last year, her friends had turned away from her. It was then that Nikki transferred to their school. For some reason, this day stuck in Shelli's memory clearly, as if it were yesterday. The morning was ordinary, except that Shelli yawned constantly. That night she hadn't slept at all. As it usually happens, inspiration caught up with her before she went to bed, preventing her from falling asleep. Shelli had thought up a wonderful outfit, and now she couldn't wait to put her fantasy to paper. Barely had she reached her desk when she took out a notebook with sketches. Opening it to the right page, she began to draw lines on the skirt, which, according to her idea, looked like a rosebud. "Wow, it looks beautiful," Kirsten approved, throwing her bag on a chair. She leaned over her desk mate, admiring the sketch. Shelli, although she did not like to show her unfinished work, could not resist. Words of support and approval were so rare for her that she was greedy for compliments. "Really?" she smiled. "You bet. I'd wear one of those myself. At the graduation, for example." "When you become a great designer, will you sew me a dress?" giggled the girl, pushing her friend with a sharp elbow in the side. "As soon as. So, immediately," waved away Shelli, but a light of hope flashed in her blue eyes. Becoming a fashion designer was her real dream, and Shelli believed that someday she would realize it. The girl was only 10 years old when the world of fashion captured her, turning not into a simple hobby of a child, but a real passion. While her classmates were still decorating their notebooks with stickers and hearts, Shelli realized she was most interested in drawing clothes. She felt delight and excitement when she drew a model's silhouette on a blank sheet of paper and then put on her what was in her head, turning fantasies into reality, if only on paper. However, she wanted more. At first, she took old scraps of fabric to create newer outfits for her dolls. She still kept her first creation, an evening long dress made of dark green fabric, with threads sticking out and uneven stitching. However, she was proud of it. When Shelli was 12, the school started additional sewing lessons for all interested students. That's how Shelli met Mrs. Tuazon, and this meeting became fateful for Shelli. "My name is Mrs. Tuazon. The teacher introduced herself to the girls with a friendly smile and a kind look around the class. "I will teach you home economics. I will help you learn knowledge and practical skills that will be useful in the household. We'll sew, have contests and tea parties. I promise it will be fun." In the first half of the year, Mrs. Tuazon introduced her students to the sewing machine. They learned to make patterns and tried sewing the simplest things on their own. Mrs. Tuazon brought books about fabrics and even told the girls about the history of fashion, which attracted young students, making them listen attentively. And if one of Shelley's classmates found it boring or difficult to embroider a pattern on a shawl, Shelli realised exactly then what she wanted to do. "You're doing an impressive job." Time after time, Mrs. Tuazon praised her pupil, but it was not enough for Shelli to sew a tack from scraps or an apron. She was seized by the idea of sewing something special. So, at the age of 14, she redesigned a dress she outgrew, making herself a miniskirt and a top. It came out too short and not very successful. Of course, in such an outfit, a 14-year-old girl could not go anywhere. However, she did not despair. Mrs. Tuazon began to support Shelli in her hobby. The kind teacher allowed her to come in after lessons and sit at the sewing machine. Of course, the teacher was always there, directing, giving advice and supporting her. Years went by, and Shelli developed her skills more and more. But the more she loved fashion, the more she felt envy when she looked around. Her classmates, thanks to their parents' efforts, wore beautiful clothes. Oh, how much Shelli wanted to dress the same way. She was ashamed to appear in front of her classmates in old clothes, covered with lint and faded from many washes. Her entire wardrobe fit into 2 sliding shelves in her closet, but her mother rarely bought her new clothes. Since childhood, Shelli wore what acquaintances gave her, even men's clothes from the red-haired Tom who lived in their entrance opposite and was 2 years older. They had money, but Lindsay didn't think it necessary to spend it on clothes for Shelli. "Do you walk around naked?" she would ask angrily if her daughter requested a new outfit for a holiday. "No, then keep quiet. You're getting spoiled, Shelli." Shelli tried to make do. She took her clothes and stood for hours in front of the mirror, looking for a way out. She combined elements of her wardrobe to create the most unusual but cute ensembles. And then she learned what a second-hand store was. Her life took a new turn. Whenever Shelli had pocket money, she immediately ran to the second-hand shop. She could disappear for hours, looking through piles of clothes, going through hangers with dresses and jackets. It was like a treasure hunt, like a real treasure hunt. Shelli searched for unusual clothes and costume jewellery that could be revamped. She found clothes from renowned brands and real vintage items, as if they'd been hanging there since the 70s and 80s. For sewing and experimenting, she found many clothes and fabrics for mere pennies. So she started sewing, using Mrs. Tuazon's office for her needs. Fortunately, the teacher didn't mind. Another year passed and Shelli's skill grew, her inspiration inexhaustible. She was thrilled when she turned a pale blue man's shirt into a light summer tunic dress with open shoulders. She made a top with ties and ripped off sleeves from a plain t-shirt with a print. She added accessories from disassembled jewellery to the collar and edges of trench coat pockets. Shelli's imagination knew no limits. Her favourite hobby gave her confidence and courage. She wasn't afraid to dress originally and stand out from the crowd. She also enjoyed giving clothes a second chance. It felt like she was taking in stray kittens, giving them a home. Yes, it was strange to have such warm feelings for clothes, but Shelli couldn't help it. This was Shelli's life until Nikki appeared in their class. With time, she became more and more interested in the world of fashion and clothing design. She went to stores and hairdressing salons to get free magazines about fashion and style. She asked the salespeople for them, and they shrugged and handed them over without any problems. She brought the magazines home, cutting out models in beautiful outfits, stars on red carpets. She carefully pasted everything into her workbooks. She spent hours drawing clothes, sometimes staying up sleepless nights over her albums. This was Shelley's life, until Nicky appeared in their class. "Good morning." The teacher came in, tapping her heels. Shelley noticed a new girl who modestly lowered her eyelashes to the floor and stood next to Mrs. Boone. How pretty she was. Her blonde, almost white hair was braided into a French braid that lay on her shoulder. White ribbons were woven into her hair. "Let me introduce you to your new schoolmate." The class teacher smiled, nodding towards the new girl. "Her name is Nicky. I want you to be kind and welcome her warmly." The classmates murmured. Paul whistled softly in delight. "Let's not do that," the teacher frowned. "Where are your manners, Paul? With such behaviour you won't attract the attention of a decent girl." "I attracted your attention," Paul replied, causing laughter from his classmates and even more indignation from the teacher. However, Shelley didn't hear this dialogue. She was thinking about how her clothes suited this beautiful newcomer. There was no uniform at their school, but students had to come in business style. The new girl wore a strict but fashionable outfit, a pleated skirt of conservative length, knee-high socks, a blouse with a bow at the collar and lacquered shoes. She seemed so innocent in her outfit, and it was precisely the image Shelley saw in one of the magazines for girls, which she read directly in stores, because she didn't have money to buy them. "All right, stop it," the teacher called for order, turning back to the new girl. "Nicky, sit at the 4th desk. There's a free seat." However, the girl glanced briefly at the middle row, shook her head, smiled modestly and asked, "My eyesight is poor. I need to sit at the front desk." "Yes?" Mrs. Boone looked around the desks and pupils, stopping at Kirsten. "Kirsten, move to the 4th desk and make way for the new girl." Kirsten sighed softly, but unhappily, and did not argue. The new girl sat down next to Shelley. "Hello." Shelley smiled openly at her. "My name is Shelley." "Hi." The girl nodded shyly. "It's a pleasure to meet you." Later, Shelley would remember that Nicky had excellent eyesight. She just wanted to sit in the front. But now the girl seemed timid and sweet to Shelley. She even thought she might find a new best friend in Nicky. After all, her bestie Maggie had moved to another city 6 months ago, and she hadn't found a new best friend since. However, as they say, there are devils in quiet waters. It was with these horned creatures that the girl would soon have to face. Nicky quickly charmed her classmates, becoming the most popular girl in the class. Boys liked her looks, blonde curls and meek smiles. She skillfully manipulated them, without them even realizing it. She would ask them to help with her backpack, or open a bottle of water because her hands were too weak. The girls loved that Nicky was from a rich family. She literally bought their friendship with gifts. If someone mentioned liking her lipstick, she would easily give it to them, saying, "I have too much makeup." She could gift her bracelet or hair clip by taking it out of her hair. Nicky loved being the centre of attention. That's why it was extremely unpleasant for her when their sewing teacher praised her desk mate so openly. However, it was not envy that became the stumbling block. Just Shelley witnessed an extremely unpleasant scene. That evening, their class was detained after lessons. On the agenda was a serious topic of discussion. "Lately, several students have approached me with the same problem," the class teacher reported. "They're losing money." "So they should spend less of it," Paul joked. "That's not funny, Paul." The teacher shook her head. "This is a serious matter. I want to warn you that stealing is a punishable offence. Next week an inspector will visit us and give you a lecture on the subject of theft." Shelli listened to the teacher and she involuntarily remembered how Nikki had asked the gym teacher to go to the restroom. Shelli had been sent to the coach's room to get a ball. She decided to go into the locker room for a drink of water when she noticed her friend. She was leaning over Kirsten's bag and recoiled from it when Shelli came in. At the time, Shelli did not pay attention to this incident and didn't think that Nikki could take something from someone else's bag. But now... "What a nightmare! Who do you think is stealing the money? One of ours?" Nikki chirped as they pulled on their jackets before leaving school. Shelli only shrugged her shoulders. She watched her friend closely, but was ashamed of her own thoughts and suspicions. When Nikki and Shelli went out of the school gate, they heard a woman's voice. "Nikki! Nikki!" Shelli looked over her shoulder with interest, not noticing how pale her friend had turned. A woman, unkemptly dressed, with long, unwashed hair and red puffy eyes, was hurrying toward them. "Nikki, my daughter, wait!" she wailed. "How did you find me?" The girl was frightened, looking around. "Daddy didn't let you come here." "Why are you talking to your mum like that?" the woman began, narrowing her eyes. "You're not my mother, and if you show up at the school again, I'll call the police," shouted the girl, and sharply rushed away. Shelli, not knowing what to do, rushed after her, asking, "Nikki, what was that?" But the girl only gave Shelli an icy stare. "Did you like what you saw? Yes, my mother is an alcoholic," shouted the girl passionately on the way. "But I'm still rich, okay? My father is a director in a construction company. I wasn't lying." Her beautiful face distorted. Her features became sharp. Shelli was completely confused. "But I didn't even think," she began. But Nikki did not hear her. She was shaking. "And what will you do? Will you tell everyone?" Angry, she stepped threateningly toward Shelli. "Just try to open your mouth. I'll destroy you. Do you understand?" "But I wasn't even going to." Shelli was indignant, throwing up her hands. She had no time to say anything else. Nikki forcefully pushed her in the chest and rushed away again. This time, Shelli did not run after her. The next morning, Shelli went to school with a heavy feeling in her soul. She wanted to talk to Nikki, to explain that she would not tell anyone anything. She thought she would share her own story with her friend in misfortune. At school, however, Nikki blatantly ignored Shelli. As soon as the bell rang for recess, she would leap from her seat and rush to the other girls, making conversation with them. It was as if Nikki didn't hear Shelli calling her name as she left the classroom. And when Shelli wrote her a note during class, Nikki, without even reading it, crumpled and threw it on the floor. However, the next day, when their class was again in the gym, she approached Shelli. "Can we talk?" she asked, averting her gaze. "Of course." Shelli was happy. "But not here." The girl shook her head. "Ask the gym teacher to go to the restroom, and I'll leave after you. Meet me in the locker room." Shelli agreed to the plan, but after waiting in the locker room for 10 minutes, she never saw her classmate. "Why didn't you come?" She grabbed Nikki's hand. Nikki pulled her wrist, looking at her classmate with surprise. "What are you talking about? Where to?" And at the break, Shelli realized that she had fallen into a spider's web set by her former friend. Nikki rummaged through her bag, shaking out its contents on the table. Then she said in front of all the classmates, "Guys, my money is missing. It happened during gym class, because before class it was still there." "Again?" Paul was indignant. "I had $100 taken out of my pocket last week." "Me too," shouted Kirsten. Shelli looked glumly at Nikki. She sensed a catch. "Did anyone leave the gym?" asked the blonde, looking around her classmates with a focused gaze. Shelli's throat constricted. Kirsten's uncertain voice came out. Shelli was leaving, and the teacher even said she must have fallen into the toilet, that she was gone for a long time. Shelli knew it wasn't her fault. However, she felt like a real criminal when all eyes turned to her. "I didn't take anything," she exclaimed, frightened. "Nikki, you asked me to come out." "What?" Nikki blinked with the most innocent bewilderment. "Where did I ask you to go?" the class murmured. Shelli looked around helplessly, looking for support but not finding it. "I wouldn't steal money. Why would I do that?" She tried to justify herself. "Why?" Nikki grinned. "Shelli, don't lie. We all understand perfectly well. You're the only one in the class who dresses in second-hand clothes. You don't even have money for lunch in the cafeteria. And recently, you said you dream about a graphic tablet and are saving money. But I didn't realize that's how you were doing it." "I'm making money. I hand out flyers," shouted Shelli, clenching her hands into fists. "But you? I saw you in the locker room last Tuesday, next to Kirsten's backpack. Maybe you're the thief." "Why are you taking it out on me?" Nikki found herself right away. "Do you think I need someone else's pennies? Me?" she laughed, and their classmates also found it ridiculous. Nikki was rich. She gave away her own things, not stole others. "Look, Shelli," Kirsten began, "you have to be honest if you have a problem." "To hell with all of you," Shelli threw angrily, blinking away angry tears. "I don't have a problem. Do you believe her?" She was choked with resentment. After all, she had known these guys since childhood, and Nikki was only a couple of months in their school. However, she knew no one believed her. "Show me your bag, since you didn't take anything," Nikki suggested. "That's right," nodded Paul. "Come on, Shelli, show us." He pulled the girl's backpack, and Shelli pulled in the other direction. "I won't show anything," she insisted, already in full flood of tears. And then Paul tugged the old bag so hard that it cracked at the seam. The contents spilled out on the floor at Shelli's feet. "Oops," Nikki waved her hands. "Okay, you'll buy a new one. With my money. Poor people should be helped, after all." "I didn't take your money," once again Shelli screamed. "Then what's this?" Nikki bent down and pulled out her wallet from under her notebook. One of the boys whistled. Classmates whispered. To Shelli's ears came separate words. "Thief, beggar, stole." At that second, the bell rang for the lesson. Looking at Nikki with undisguised anger, Shelli ran out of the classroom. After this incident, Shelli did not go to school for a week, saying she was sick, and when she returned, Nikki had already turned the whole class against her. Since then, the girl began to be laughed at and mocked. Even those who previously admired her sense of style turned their noses up at her. Friends also turned away from Shelli, siding with Nikki. The first day Shelli returned to class, Nikki turned her nose up like a sniffer dog. She wrinkled her face and clamped her nose with her fingers. "Ooh, what's that smell? Shelli?" she shouted for all to hear. "Your clothes stink. Did you take them off a dead man?" Laughs broke out, and Shelli blushed to the tips of her ears, but ignored the outburst. "What are you talking about?" inquired Kirsten, who either wanted to be Nikki's friend or was angry at Shelli because of the loss of her pocket money. "You don't know?" Nikki was surprised. "Clothes that are sold in second-hand shops are removed from corpses. Not all of them, of course, but most of the things belong to the dead. I personally know the story of how a friend of mine died. They collected all her clothes and put them in a second-hand shop. Where else would they put it?" "Ugh! Abomination!" The girls wrinkled in disgust and superstitious fear, looking at Shelli. "I was watching a program about physics," Kirsten intervened again. "They say that the clothes of the dead retain negative energy. It can bring harm. A person will be transmitted dead energy. He can even die. So it's better not to be near such people." Shelli listened to this, staring at the desk. Of course, Shelli tried to figure it out. She caught Nikki after school. "You must tell them the truth. Why are you doing this to me?" Shelli demanded, confused. "I don't owe you anything. In fact, say thank you to me. I told them not to tell the teacher about the incident, but if you keep nagging me, I'll go to the police. Okay? They'll believe me over you anyway. I'm an excellent student. My father paid for the school renovation, and you are living with a single mother wearing rags." "But why do you need money?" Shelli asked in a cracked voice, not understanding her ex-friend. Nikki had everything. Why would she steal it? Nikki smiled. "Just like that. It's fun." Shelli's life became a living hell. Every day at school was full of humiliation. "Open the windows," the girls shouted as soon as Shelli entered the room. "It stinks of second-hand smoke." The others agreed, waving their hands in front of their faces. "I have an idea how you can save on things even more," Nikki laughed. "Go straight to the cemetery or negotiate with the morgue owner. You'll be the first to receive new items." Even those who previously admired Shelli's style and asked for her advice now turned away from her. Shelli realized that school is like the jungle. If you show weakness, you're no longer part of the pack. An outcast will be kicked out or eaten. Her classmates started playing tricks on her. They threw out her workbooks, shook the contents of her pencil case out the window. Once they poured glue on a chair. It didn't glue the girl to the seat, but it ruined her black pants. When Shelli tried to fight back, they threatened to call the police and lie to the teacher. Soon, Shelli accepted it. She couldn't fix it. 6 months passed, summer passed, and a new school year began. The girl found an outlet in a hobby and peace in the sewing room. She forgot her problems and sorrows. Once she took a pencil or cloth in her hands. The teacher understood that the girl was struggling but didn't pry. She supported her in her way. She treated her with cookies baked by her students, brought fabric scraps Shelli could use, and gave her interesting books. "You will definitely achieve great success, Shelli, if you do not give up and go to your goal until the end," Mrs. Tuazon said. "You have real talent." And now, after hearing her mother's confession about her real father, Shelli got even more determined. She wasn't going to shed tears forever. She had only a year left to study, and after graduation she planned to find a job. "Have a little more patience," Shelli asked her crying reflection in the mirror. "You're strong, aren't you?" That night, when her mother's drunken snoring filled the apartment, the girl snuck into the kitchen. She pulled out her mum's cookbooks and began leafing through the pages. In the first one, she saw a picture of her real father. It was a portrait. Her dad was amazingly handsome, with thick, unruly hair and a cheerful squint in his eyes. "Well, hello, Dad," the girl whispered. "Maybe someday you and I will meet. Who knows? Maybe at least you love me." She didn't put the photo back. She stashed it away. 3 more months passed. It was December, almost the end of the semester. Mrs. Tuazon found Shelli in the hall as she was leaving the school. "Shelli," she shouted after her. "Wait!" Shelli zipped up her down jacket and stopped. She stared curiously at her favourite teacher, seeing how excited she was. "Look!" The teacher showed her a booklet. "We will have a competition for young designers and fashion designers. This is a qualifying round. You have to send an application form, a sketch, a brief description of the product with its name, and the materials it is made of," the teacher explained, almost jumping with joy. "In the second round, They will evaluate the product itself, already on the model. There is no organisational fee. You have to try it." The girl looked at what was at stake and gasped. In addition to the cash grant, they promised an internship at a leading fashion house and the opportunity to participate in fashion weeks and exhibitions. "I don't think I can do it," Shelli said honestly. "The contestants probably have more experience, and I am self-taught." "But you have talent and passion," Mrs. Tuazon exclaimed. "At least try. What do you have to lose?" The girl shifted from foot to foot. If only she could create that dress, like a rose, decorated with glass dewdrops. It was her favourite sketch so far, but where would she get the money? "I don't have any fabric. I need a good one." "What kind of fabric do you need?" the teacher asked. Shelli bit her lip in doubt. "Matte organza, pale pink." She explained her idea to the teacher, who nodded decisively. However, Shelli did not expect that in 3 days Mrs. Tuazon would bring all the necessary materials. "Create, my dear," the teacher smiled. "I believe in you." Inspired by the support, Shelli eagerly began to work. She improved her favourite sketch, turning the dress into a fabulous creation. The response from the contest organisers came in a beautiful envelope on heavy paper. Despite her curiosity, Shelli didn't open it right away. She ran to the teacher with her heart pounding in her chest. "The result of the qualifying is here," she blurted out from the threshold of the teacher's office. "Well, what is it?" the woman asked impatiently, nodding at the envelope. Shelli swallowed. When she opened the envelope, her hands were shaking. Glancing at the message, she froze. She looked up at the worried teacher. "Oh my goodness," Shelli exhaled. "I passed." The teacher clapped her hands and shrieked with joy, just like a schoolgirl. She hugged her protégée, sincerely congratulating her. "You're a smart girl. You're so smart," she repeated. And Shelli cried. She realised that this victory was just a drop in the sea of her journey, but now she felt that she could swim the whole ocean. Shelli worked hard as she sewed a dress from the fabric donated by her teacher. When it was almost finished, she brought it home to decorate it as planned. The dress turned out marvellous. The fabric was airy and weightless, and the folds of the skirt resembled a rosebud. Shelli was in a hurry. In 2 days she had to take the dress to a competition, but there were still a few important touches left. So she decided to sacrifice sleep again to finish on time. Night came. The girl, engrossed in her work, did not immediately hear the key turning in the lock. A moment later there were voices, and then stifled laughter. Her mum came home, and not alone. By this time, Shelli had gotten used to the fact that her mother could be gone for 24 hours, or even 2 days. At first, she looked for her, worried and called, but Lindsay only scolded her daughter, shouting that she should not interfere with her life. A year ago, Lindsay found herself a man, but her choice was incomprehensible to Shelli. Bill walked with a bracelet on his leg, a device for constant tracking of released prisoners. He claimed he was convicted for nothing. He borrowed a cell phone from a girl and she accused him of stealing it. He was blaming the justice system, insisting he was as innocent as a lamb. Shelli didn't believe him. He had a slippery and sticky look, but her mother was very fond of Bill, spending the money she earned on that Alfonso. "Shelli, are you home?" Mum asked, opening the door to her room. "Why aren't you sleeping?" Shelli was settled on the floor, threading and sewing transparent beads in a chaotic order. Even from her spot, she could smell the odour of alcohol and tobacco coming from her mother. The girl looked up and noticed how much her mother had given up. Her face was red and swollen, and her dark hair had faded. "I'm doing a project for school," said Shelli. "It's due soon." "We have Bill visiting," Mum warned, "so stay out of the way." Shelli had no intention of asking to join their company. She went back to work, and when she finished, it was late at night. "Oh," the girl wrinkled her nose, rubbing her stiff shoulders. "My legs are all stiff." Despite the grumbling, she was pleased with herself. She hung the pink outfit on the rack and took 2 steps back, admiring it. With a wide yawn, she listened. The apartment was quiet. Her mother and her man must have been deep asleep. The girl slipped out of the room to get a drink of water before going to bed. She rubbed her tired eyes, walking barefoot into the kitchen. When she filled a glass with water and turned around, she gasped loudly. Bill stood at the threshold, looking at her with a strange predatory gaze. He stared at her thighs and her breasts, which had only recently started to develop. Shelli was wearing just pyjamas, a t-shirt and shorts, but she felt as if she was standing without clothes. Shelli felt a sense of consternation. "Hello," she nodded, unsure of what to do. She wanted to leave the kitchen, but Bill wasn't moving. Hi, he grinned. "Can't sleep?" "I'm about to go to bed." "Can I come with you?" The man raised an eyebrow. Shelli was taken aback, speechless at such an offer. "I'm just kidding," he chuckled, walking towards her. "You relax, little girl." He touched her shoulder, making Shelli wince. Her skin was covered by only a thin strap, and Bill's touch felt like scratching. Shelli jerked her shoulder, shaking off his hand. Bill didn't seem to notice, ignoring the fact that she was trembling with fear. "You're so beautiful, Shelli." He seemed to savour her name, squeezing his eyes shut with pleasure. Fear gripped Shelli's arms and legs. She couldn't move. It seemed she couldn't even breathe. The drowsiness was gone, replaced by shock. She didn't realise when Bill had gotten so close that she could see the pores on his nose. His stale breath made her nauseous. "Step back," she whispered. "I don't want to," the man grinned. "Come on, Shelli. You have no idea what it's like to be with a capable man. You're still a girl, aren't you? You'll give yourself to some inexperienced classmate. It'll be unpleasant, but I know how to make it nice." She realised that in one more second she would turn inside out. But no sooner had she rushed to the sink than she heard her mother's voice. "What's going on here?" It had been a long time since she felt such a sense of security and relief at her mother's appearance. Bill's hand was gone, and the girl could breathe again. "Mummy!" she sobbed, but Bill interrupted the girl cheerfully. "I went out for a drink of water, Lindsay. It seems that Shelli became ill. Don't let her study so much, she's already pale." Lindsay looked at her lover and daughter with a keen eye. "Go to your room," she told Shelli. Shelli, without looking in Bill's direction, snuck down the corridor to her bedroom. There she threw herself into bed, covering her head with a blanket. The girl sobbed. How vile and disgusting she felt. The former excitement about the dress was gone. However, a few minutes later, the door to the room creaked open. Shelli couldn't believe her ears when she heard her mother's voice. "What are you doing, little courtesan? Do you want to play Lolita?" She tugged the blanket off her daughter and looked at her with anger. "Mum, I didn't do anything." Shelli was even more frightened. "Of course you didn't. Do you think I'm stupid? You walk around almost without clothes in front of my man, tail wagging. You think that if you're younger and prettier you can do anything? Who stole my youth? You did." "He came up to me," Shelli shouted back. "Your Bill is a convict and you still believe him. Do you know what he was in prison for? Or do you believe the nonsense he's been telling you? He told me bad things. He's using you, Mum." Lindsay burst into flames. She looked around in a rage. Then her eyes fell on the dress that was hanging beautifully on the rack. What kind of rags are these? Is this what you're going to wear when you go out with men? To seduce them? That's how I raised you, isn't it? Lindsay, in a fit of anger, rushed to the dress. Realizing what was about to happen, the girl jumped out of bed. "Don't touch it! It's for a competition!" she shouted exasperatedly, grabbing her mother's hand. But Lindsay pushed her away, clutching the dress with her other hand, and it had to happen that was where the pins were, which the girl had stuck into the piece when she was working. Lindsay screamed, pulling her hand away. 2 drops of blood appeared on her palm. The pain didn't sober the woman, but worsened it. "What a wretch!" she shouted, pulling the dress off the rack. "I'll teach you to respect me." Shelli fought for her work, but to no avail. You can't pull the fabric in different directions without tearing it. In the end, the floor of her room was strewn with pink pieces of cloth. Shelli sank to her knees exhaustedly, looking at them. She couldn't believe it. Her dream had been torn to shreds by her own mother. "I hate you," whispered Shelli, for the first time in her life. "What did you say?" Lindsay narrowed her eyes. "I hate you," shouted Shelli tearfully. I tried to love you. God knows I'm exhausted trying to find something good in you." "Get out of my house," her mother shouted at her. "Get out of my house!" Shelli didn't need to be forced. She quickly packed her bag, grabbed the rest of her dress, and within half an hour she was at Mrs. Tuazon's doorstep. Mrs. Tuazon lived with her husband in a 2-room apartment, but since her husband was on a voyage, she was alone. She welcomed Shelli and listened to her story. "It won't take long," Shelli promised. "It's just I have nowhere else to go." She decided it was better to stay in the orphanage than return to her mother and Bill. "Stay as long as you need," Mrs. Tuazon reassured her. "I'm bored alone anyway, and my husband won't be home for another 3 months." Mrs. Tuazon gave Shelli a free room. Only Shelli couldn't sleep the rest of the night. Eventually she got out of bed, took out her bag and started working again. Anger, resentment, and a sense of injustice surrounded Shelli, spurring the craftswoman and giving her strength. If she once worked for joy, now she was excited. "I will prove that I am worth something. I will prove it to all of you," she mumbled, reanimating the tortured outfit. In the morning, Mrs. Tuazon found her on the floor. Shelli had fallen asleep at work, resting her head on the pink skirt. On her cheeks were dried paths of tears. The rest of the time before the contest passed in a flurry of work. Mrs. Tuazon helped her student, and they met the deadline. However, they presented to the jury and the audience something different from the sketch. "Bold," noted one of the judges, looking at the model before him. "I would even say extravagant." The long sleeves, which made the girl's arms appear even thinner, were tattered and now held together by thin chains. The former petals were wilted, their edges carefully torn and scorched. "But your work does not match the design," a woman in stern glasses remarked. "I wanted to add something special," commented Shelli. The jury looked at each other and began to deliberate. Shelli did not win the contest, but she received a statuette and a certificate for originality. This inspired her to take decisive action. She resolutely approached the man who praised her work. "I'm sorry," she addressed him. "Could you help me?" "Oh, Ms. Originality," he smiled. "What can I do for you?" "I want to work in the fashion industry, to be a fashion designer, and to learn. I'm ready to learn," Shelli repeated hotly. "I'll do anything, even work for free. I can sew well, believe me. I can make patterns and templates. I've read and practiced a lot." There must have been something special in the high school girl's blue eyes. The man just couldn't brush off her request. "My friend, Helen Tang, needs apprentices," he informed her, handing her a business card. "If you want, then come." So the girl became an apprentice at a local atelier. This step was fateful and strengthened Shelley's thought. "I love fashion." At first, she combined work with her studies. She no longer cared about classmates' mockery or her mother's opinion. She just followed her chosen path. After graduation from school, Shelley was hired full-time. Initially, she was treated without proper trust, often playing the role of a girl on the run. But soon, the owner saw her potential. Helen made her a personal assistant and shared her knowledge, which Shelley absorbed like a sponge. Shelley rented a room in a dormitory. There was a common kitchen and noisy neighbours, but she didn't care. She was starting a new life. A year and a half passed. Now, Shelley did not wear second-hand clothes. She sewed her own dresses after hours. One sultry summer day, the door of the atelier opened, and a beautiful lady and her daughter walked in. "Helen, hello, we're here to see you again," the woman reported, smiling broadly at the hostess. "Sarah, what a pleasant surprise," Helen greeted her acquaintance. "We want to order cocktail dresses. We've been invited to a wedding, and we're told to wear purple. Can you imagine? And what if it doesn't suit us?" The woman chuckled. "Come on, everything suits you," Helen complimented her friend. Then she turned to her subordinate. "Shelley, take measurements from our guests. Start with Amanda, and Sarah and I will chat a little for now." Shelley nodded, ready to work. Amanda was almost 5 years younger than her, a very chatty and cheerful girl. They quickly found common ground. "Stop making me laugh," Shelley asked, laughing at another of Amanda's jokes, "or I'll prick you with a needle." "What a service you have," Amanda giggled. Talking with Amanda reminded Shelley what it was like to have a friend. The girl, who had grown up abruptly and become independent, had forgotten the last time she talked about something besides work. "You have a great dress," Amanda complimented her, looking at Shelley's summer sundress. At this moment, Amanda's mother came up to the girls. "I have to agree, the dress is adorable. Who made it? Was it Helen? I recognize her skill." "No," Shelley smiled embarrassedly. "I created the sketch and sewed it myself." "She is extremely talented," Helen said proudly. "She sews all her own clothes." "Wow! You just have to make me something like this." Amanda grabbed the craftswoman's hand, looking hopefully into her eyes. "Please?" Shelley looked uncertainly at the boss, but the latter nodded with a smile. So the girl received the first personal order in her life, in which she put all her soul. When Amanda came to pick up the dress, she gasped. She did not agree on the sketch colour and fabric. Amanda wanted the outfit to be a surprise, but the dress exceeded all her expectations. So with time, Amanda and Shelley became closer, began to communicate more often. Shelley liked carefree Amanda very much. In August, Amanda invited her friend to visit her country house. "You just need to spend the weekend at the pool," she said. "You're as pale as a moth." "Thank you for the compliment," Shelley snorted in response, though she didn't refuse the prospect of sunbathing. The girls spent the day wonderfully and lazily, enjoying the sun and eating fruit. When it was time for dinner, Sarah joined the girls. They settled down in the cosy, spacious dining room. The aromas of baked chicken and potatoes wafted through the air. "Did you have a good time?" asked the mistress of the house, putting an impressive portion of salad on the guest's plate. Shelley did not have an opportunity to answer, as the attention of those present was attracted by a man's voice. "Pardon me, I'm late. The traffic jam stretches from the city centre. In this weather, everyone wants to go to nature for the weekend." A handsome man entered the dining room, smiling at his family. "Do we have guests? Good evening." Shelli looked up from her plate and turned pale with shock. In front of her stood the man from the picture her mother had hidden. Of course, he was already older, but it was impossible not to recognize him. It can't be. It must be a coincidence. A thought flashed through the girl's mind. But are there such similar people? Her heart beat feverishly in her chest, and the blood rushed to her face. "Your name is Jordan?" mumbled the girl, astonished and barely able to speak. "What?" he asked again, and then nodded. "Yes, Jordan Antolievich, and you?" "I seem to be your daughter," Shelli blurted out. Only after a minute, noticing the silence that engulfed the dining room, seeing the stretched faces of Sarah and Amanda, did the girl realize what a foolish thing she had done. She jumped to her feet, dropping her fork on the floor, and frighteningly babbled, "I'm sorry, it's just, you look so much alike." She waved her hands ridiculously, like a bird trying to fly away. Jordan looked at the girl silently, obviously doubting her sanity. But then he noticed the shade of her hair, her blue eyes and the dimple in her chin. His eyebrows furrowed. "Calm down, Shelli," Sarah suddenly said, putting her hand on the girl's shoulder. "It's all right. You can tell us everything if you'd like to." Shelli, not expecting such a merciful reaction to her unworthy behaviour, couldn't stand it and cried. Her speech was slurred as she sat on the sofa in the living room and told the story of her life. She jumped from one thing to another, revealing to strangers the secret of her own birth. She did not dare even look at Jordan. "It was like that," said the man in a cracked voice when the girl finished her story. "But Lindsay said she had gotten rid of the pregnancy. I went to Europe to study. Didn't—" Shelli rubbed her chilled palms. At that moment, she remembered that sometimes, falling asleep in the dormitory under the shouts of a drunken neighbour, she dreamed that she would find her father, thought he would be happy to know about her. But now her dreams had been dashed. He's sure to hate her. After all, she must have ruined his family by showing up. Who would be happy to have a grown-up daughter? No one. No one wants you. She remembered her mother's words and shivered as if from the cold. Just then, a soft cloth descended on her shoulders. She looked up and met the same blue eyes. The man adjusted the plaid on her shoulders. "I can't believe it." He smiled softly. In Shelli's eyes, even from such a weak manifestation of parental warmth, tears appeared again. Everything that happened next seemed like a dream to Shelli. Only if before she was tormented by nightmares, now she did not want to wake up. Her father took her in. He turned out to be a decent, wonderful man. Sarah, after apologizing to the girl, still asked her to take a DNA test. Although even she said that the girl was very similar to her husband and was surprised they had not noticed it earlier. Of course, the test proved the kinship of Jordan and Shelli. So, the girl had a family again. She was distressed about how she would be accepted by the wife and daughter of her father, especially Amanda. It is one thing to find a friend, and another to find a sister. Maybe Amanda did not want to share the attention of her father. So, the girl refused to move into her father's house, remaining in her dormitory. And then one day, Amanda knocked on her door. "So, sister," the girl said in a commanding tone, rolling up her sleeves. "Gather your things, throw dresses and lipsticks in a bag. We're moving." "Where?" "Oh, don't be silly. Sisters are not lying on the road. You and I have missed so much. We have to make up for it. And anyway, I really count that now you'll sew all these cool dresses for me for free," Amanda said and burst into laughter. Shelli laughed, assuring her sister that she would. Natalie also treated her stepdaughter with tenderness, as if trying to give the girl the love her own mother hadn't. They often cooked together and had breakfast and dinner as a family, spending weekends together. "You know, Jordan, and I always dreamed of having 2 children," Sarah once shared while kneading dough. "It seems that God heard our hopes and sent you." Time passed, and Shelli's career developed rapidly, partly thanks to her father's help, and partly due to word of mouth. More and more clients, especially young girls, eagerly visited Helen's salon to get dresses for graduations, birthdays, or other special occasions. Soon, Shelli's name was well known at fashion shows. By age 25, she was a welcome guest at European fashion weeks, and her dresses were worn by stars. One day, Shelli received an invitation to a reunion party. She crumpled it up and threw it in the trash, but her inquisitive younger sister pulled the envelope out. "What is this?" she asked, taking out the letter. "Wow, they say you're the guest of honour at their school. They must have heard you're a famous fashion designer, and now your principal wants a new suit." The girl giggled, but Shelli only slightly smiled, remembering Mrs. Tuazon. They kept in touch, but the woman had moved to another city with her husband. Shelli didn't want to see anyone else from her school. "Throw it away," she told her sister. "It's an invitation to the past. I don't want to go back there." "You must go," she said. "Show them they didn't break you. Close that door at last. You're still thinking longingly about the past. Go and see that these people aren't worth a fingernail." Shelli shook her head in doubt, but she didn't throw away the crumpled envelope a second time. The reunion day was rainy. A fancy car stopped in front of the school, and the driver got out to open the door and hold an umbrella over his passenger. Shelli smiled gratefully at the man who helped her out of the car, took the umbrella, and stopped in front of the stairs leading inside. She had vague feelings inside. What was she doing here? Why had she succumbed to her sister's pleas? Seeing these people was the last thing she wanted. However, she gathered her wits and resolutely went inside. The classmates were meeting in their classroom and then planned to go to a restaurant. When Shelli entered the right door, all the talk died down, and she felt like the heroine of a movie. She was looking at her classmates' faces. They had grown up, but she could still recognize each of them. There was Paul, Kirsten, and Nikki. Nikki didn't look as spectacular as Shelli remembered. Her hair was thin, braided into a mousy ponytail, and her clothes were still classic. Shelli had heard rumours that Nikki worked as an accountant. Well, she always knew how to hide or steal money. Shelli experienced déjà vu, but now they had switched places. Nikki was sitting at the front desk, and Shelli stood next to the class teacher. Envy clearly appeared in Nikki's eyes. "Shelli has become a famous fashion designer. I think you've all heard about it," said the class teacher. "The principal and I had a wonderful idea. In honour of the school's anniversary, you could be interviewed by a local TV station to tell about your path to success, which began here, within these walls. After all, you sewed your first dresses here, didn't you?" Shelli smiled sadly. She had no intention of dredging up the past. But the teacher's fake smiles and her former classmates' squints got on her nerves. "I can't do it," she said softly but clearly. "I'd have to tell how my classmates bullied me and how the teachers turned a blind eye. I'd have to tell you how my friend falsely accused me of her own sins. So, should I do an interview like this?" Or would it tarnish the reputation of your school? Someone exhaled loudly, probably Paul. Nicky sat as pale as school chalk. At that moment, all the former classmates who had hurt Shelli or let others bully her realized the power she held. They feared she would expose their past sins. Someone had a business. Someone had a family. Did they want such fame? No. Of course, Shelli wasn't going to do that to them. She was always better than these people. You know, I think I'll go, she said when the pause was over. Have a good evening. Turning around, she walked out of the office, keeping her back straight. The door behind her finally closed.